So thanks for coming tonight. And this is all coming about because we're out here trying to grow the grassroots. This is something we believe in, Convention States Project. So we're trying to pass the word around as much as we can. And through town halls, we've been doing parades, we've been doing fairs, whatever we can, wherever we can go. We're talking about doing some going and knocking door to door even. But anyway, we can talk about that later. I want to introduce the speaker to you. I'm probably getting ahead of myself. Let's start off. Lynn, would you lead us in a prayer to start us off?
Sure. You want the pledge first or the prayer first?
Prayer, how about God before country?
God before country. God and country. Lord, we're gathered here tonight, and we're asking your presence to be with us. Our government was set up by you, Lord. It was the providence of God that brought about the United States of America. And Lord, it's slipping away from us, and we would like to have it back. And here's a way that you spoke to our founding fathers that it can be done. So I'm praying for wisdom and understanding for those that are here. Pray that you would bless Mark as he speaks. We would have understanding too, Lord, and that ultimately, Lord, your name would be praised and would be one nation under God again, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Lord. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. It's been about a little over a year ago. I got an email from Mark, and he wanted to know what he needed to do to get involved in this organization to help make this happen. And so I thought, well, I'll give him a call, and I did. And we talked for 15, 20 minutes, and he's got a man's voice. He's got a lot of knowledge. I thought I was talking to a man. And I knew that I didn't have a district captain where he lived. We divided the state up into house districts. Well, the state did that. We are trying to put a district captain in every house district in the state, and I didn't have one there. And so I started asking him if he would be interested in doing this, and he said, well, I probably ought to tell you I'm a sophomore in high school. And I thought, well, now I really want to meet him. And so we got to talking a little bit more, and it was just about a year ago, Mark Meckler, one of the founders of this organization, was going to be speaking at Gardner, Kansas, and so I said something to him. He didn't know who that was, but he knew the other founder, Michael Ferris, and so he says, okay, yeah. He said, we can be there. He said, I'll bring my whole family, and so I met his whole family at that point, and well, I'm not sure what to say since then. He's been giving presentations. He has testified at the Capitol. We haven't looked back. His dad, his whole family has gotten involved in this. I could show you pictures. Anyway, Mark McAllister, y'all.
Appreciate that, and again, I'll say it again, I appreciate you guys being here this evening to take part in this. And I started with this the other night. I think God's probably the most central aspect of the Convention of States movement. The ideas and the blessing that God has given to us as Americans has been more than we could ask, think, or imagine. And in order for us to take that back, take our country back, take those principles back, to take our America back, it starts with God. So when I talk about convention of states tonight, that's where I'm coming from. I'm coming from God has called me, He's called my family, He's called the COS people in this room, He's called all of us to serve our country. And this is how I think I can serve the country the best. So with that, I'd like to proceed into what we're talking about. Just so I know how deep I need to go. How many of you have heard of Convention of States? Okay. How many of you are fairly familiar with what Convention of States is and what it does? We got a couple. All right, awesome. So the first thing I'd like to step into, if I can get my clicker working. There we go. So the first thing I want to talk about is Convention of States, how it happens. So specifically what it says in Article 5, how it's detailed, and we can work with all those specificities. Now, I want you to stop me. If you don't quite understand something, just stop me and ask a question. I'm okay with that. If it's something that maybe goes on for too long, then we can postpone that question to the end. We're honored to have David Schneider here. He's a regional director of 10 states around this area, and he's much more knowledgeable than I am in this issue. So we can save the really detailed questions for the end, but if you don't quite understand something, just raise your hand and I will do my best to explain that. So that's the first thing we'll talk about. The second one is we'll talk about the founding principles. So after we understand what we're talking about, then I'd like to dive a little deeper into what it is and why it is that we're going into this Convention of States, why it's so important, the founding principles, and then what we have today, just basically showing how we've slipped from those. So let's go ahead and start off. Article 5 of the Constitution. Now this is the direct wording. You can take out the Constitution, read it. The Congress, whenever, that means whenever they feel like it, whenever they so choose, Congress or the states, at any time, tomorrow morning at 7, 2 weeks from now at 5, any time they so choose, we call a convention. Or, as this reads, Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to the Constitution. All right, we've done this 27 times. The first 10 were our Bill of Rights. The next 17 have been progressive through the years. We've passed amendments through Congress. All right, and then here's where it gets interesting. Or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, 2/3 of 50 is 34, shall call a convention proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid in the intent purposes as parts of this Constitution. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the 34 states. So the states have to call a convention. Now, in actual reality, the bill that calls a convention, it's only a few paragraphs long, and it just says we're going to call a convention, and there are 3 planks which we call it under. Now, we'll talk about that in just a second. So far, this Convention of States movement, this type of application, has been passed by 12 states. Kansas has come close 2 years ago. We're still working on it, though. Obviously, we're here tonight to work on that. So the first part is that 34 call it. Now we get into the convention. So how do we get delegates into the convention? Where do they come from? The legislatures of each state will choose their delegates. Now how do we know that? Because in all of the previous conventions where we've had the states come together, including the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and conventions before that, the legislatures of each of the states have chosen their delegates. All right, so once we pass the application of the 34 states, then each state is responsible to choose their own delegates and then send them to this convention. All right, are you with me so far? All right, so when they're at this convention, they break up into their committees and they choose their chairman, their president of the convention, and then they hack out amendments, just like Congress has done 27 times. And they say, we've got these certain issues, we're going to talk about these issues, and here's the amendment that we have. And then it goes to the floor, and if it gets passed out of the convention, I like to say it gets put in a little box. And this box is called the amendment box. All right, and then the convention closes, and we move on, and then each individual amendment that was passed out of this convention is then sent to all the states, just like we've ratified the other 27. Then each of the states take that individual amendment out of that box, and we send it to all the states, and 3/4, as it says down here, or by the conventions, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the states. All right, so bear with me here. We take this amendment out of the box, and then we send it to all of the states, all 50, and if 38 states ratify this single amendment, then it becomes part of the Constitution. All right, individually, they get passed out. Now, I mentioned there are 3 topics that we're calling a convention of states for. What are those 3 topics? The first topic is fiscal restraints, or a balanced budget. Right, we've got to control our spending, and we've got to spend no more than we make, and we've got to fix this massive debt that's burdening our country, all right? So that's the first aspect that we get to talk about under this convention with this application. The second one is term limits. And this is term limits on all federal officials, not just the Supreme Court, not just Congress, not just the Senate, not just the President, but any federal officer for the United States, term limits on those officials. So that's the second plank. And then the final one is limiting the size, scope, and jurisdiction of the federal government. That's pretty broad, That's just basically, we want to make the federal government small, because when we have small government, the liberties expand. And that's one of those principles I'll talk about in a second. All right, so the three topics that we're passing the application for are first, what are the first one I said? Fiscal restraints on the federal government, that's the balanced budget. The second one is term limits, and the third one is limiting the scope of the federal government. So that's the application which we're passing. So if all the 12 states who have passed it so far have passed an application for those three topics. All right, that's about as much as the Constitution says. So basically, we'll roll through it here. The first one is through Congress. It's ratified by 3/4 of the states. It becomes part of the Constitution. The second process, articulated in Article 5, is we get a convention of states, and we get those delegates from all the states, we propose amendments, and they're ratified just like the others, 3/4 of the states, 38 out of 50. All right, so again, just rolling down here, this is a convention of states, and this is how it happens. Now I'll pause here. Are there any questions? Is there something you don't quite understand? Are we good? Question in the back.
Is there a time limit on time frame that they have to ask for the convention?
Absolutely, great question. That is dependent upon the states. The states can put a sunset clause on their application saying we want it to end in, if we were to pass it next year, let's say we want it to end in 2025. And by then we'll have to pass another application. Now I think a few states out of those 12 have passed what they call a sunset clause. 2 of the states have passed a sunset clause saying we have to pass another application after this date. So yes, that's up to the states to decide though. Any other questions? Yes.
Mark, 12 states have passed this.
Yes, sir.
And as far as, where are those 12 roughly? I mean, are they southern, are they northeastern? I mean,
All over.
Or
They're
they're
all
just
over.
spread out?
They're all over. North
all-
Dakota, Missouri,
Printed out a map.
Oklahoma, Texas,
Alaska,
Alaska,
Indiana, North,
Georgia,
Tennessee,
Alabama,
Alabama.
Tennessee,
Texas,
Texas,
there are 3 more.
Florida,
Florida,
and Louisiana,
there you go.
and then
All over,
Is that
all
it?
over.
Arizona.
and
Arizona,
Arizona.
and the most recent one was
Missouri.
Missouri,
Most
which
recent.
passed it it was early summer of this year, 2017. So yeah, all over. It hasn't been specifically in a certain area. It's
Did we say Indiana?
very diverse. Indiana, there we go. Iowa's working on it. They're close to it. The closest one is Michigan right now.
Yeah, we're working
They
on
are.
Michigan right
They're
now.
whipping it together up there. So yeah, it's very diverse. It's all over the place. Question over there in the back.
So if 34 of the states
Yes, sir.
come together and say, we want a convention, do the other states have to honor that and send representatives to that
The
convention?
other states will be invited.
If we call a convention,
They'll be invited.
all 50 states are invited. Now, it's up to them to come or not come. In all likelihood, to this date, the states have come together when there's been an application. So it's up to them, it's up to them to come, but once 34 states pass an application, all 50 states are invited. So everybody in the union.
No one can say, well, we're not coming. So
They can.
They can.
They can.
Sure.
That's highly unlikely, but it's totally possible. If someone doesn't want to show up, they won't show up. And their vote doesn't count. The convention will still go on, though, as soon as 34 states pass the application with those three topics. Are there any other questions? All right, this is a quick 4-minute video that describes what I just described in a little succincter manner, and it describes a few of the other things. So, let's see if we can play this here.
Article 5 of the United States Constitution gives we the people the power to put the federal government back in its constitutional box and expand liberty for all. Once 2/3 of the states.
Technology.
And there is nothing the federal government can do to stop it. This isn't a red movement or a blue movement. It's an American movement based on one fundamental question. Who decides? Who should decide the issues that affect your community? Washington, D.C. or you? The Convention of States Action Resolution applies for an Article 5 convention that would propose constitutional reforms limited to 3 topics. First, fiscal restraints on the federal government. With over $140 trillion in unfunded liabilities, we need a balanced budget. But our resolution also allows for caps on federal spending and taxation. The second topic is limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. The Supreme Court has authorized the feds to have control over almost every aspect of our lives. The COS Action Resolution empowers us to restore the Constitution to its original intent and return power to the states and the people. Finally, term limits. Thanks to a corrupt ruling class in Washington, trust in the federal government is at an all-time low. That's why our resolution gives Convention of States Commissioners the power to send the career politicians packing, including the judiciary and other federal officials. So what can you do? First of all, sign the petition at cosaction.com and get as many of your friends and family to do the same. With your full address, your state legislators will know that you really are their constituents in their district. Call, email, or request a meeting with your state legislators to ask them to co-sponsor the COS resolution in their state. Get plugged in with your local Convention of States team so you can stay engaged, educate others, and respond to national calls to action. Our success depends on you. So we're inviting you to be part of history. Let's invoke the constitutional solution that's as big as the problem.
It rolls through a couple of the others. At the time this video was made, only 8 states had passed it. All right, so now I'm going to move into sort of the principles that we were founded on. Are there any questions before I move on? I want to make sure you guys are understanding what we're trying to present here. Are we good? All right. So one of my favorite politicians, Bob McEwen, he put it this way. He said, if there's a church on this corner that's prospering, there's a reason. And if there's a church on this corner that's doing poorly, there's a reason. Right? And if there's a city over here that's prospering, there's a reason. And if there's a city over here that's doing poorly, there's a reason. And the same thing applies to nations. If there's a nation over here that's doing really well, there's a reason for that good aspect. All right? And if there's a poor nation over here that's doing poorly, there's a reason why it's failing. All right? And the principles which we were founded upon is the bedrock of our freedom. All right? That's where we created this nation that's done more than any other nation in history. All right? We've created so many things. We've provided liberty for so many other people, not just United States citizens, but for citizens all over the world. We're the only nation in history to use our overwhelming military power for the benefication of other people. We're the only country to do that. So what are those principles? What has given us this government that we have today? And that's what I want to look into. This is the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. And I'll read the underlined part here. We'll discuss some of the other parts here in a moment. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, the ends mentioned above, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem likely to affect their safety and happiness. All right, we got principles here. Now, it's in my opinion that we've shifted from those principles, and because we've shifted, we're no longer reaping the benefits that those principles provided. So what are those principles? The first one is sovereignty of the people. All right, we've been very specific here in the United States from the very founding, the very first colony, 1608. We've been very specific that the people are sovereign. The people are the ones who govern. All right, and I'll explain how that happens. The second one is sovereignty of the states. All right, once we have these small communities, we have these cities that are sovereign, and each of the people inside those cities are sovereign, and they govern their little city. But then when we get a bunch of cities in the same area, they have to come together and they have to form laws for that area. Many of the disputes that came up were land deals, and they had to figure out which land belonged to which city, and so they had to create a larger government. All right, sovereignty of the states. Again, it's sovereignty of the people. The next step is sovereignty of the states, and we'll explain that. And then, finally, the third one is history of the convention. The states have gotten together in discussions some 30-odd times, and so we'll go over a few of those. And so those are the 3 principles that I want to talk about. So the first one, sovereignty of the people. So we showed up here on this continent, and we tried to start a colony. And the only instructions that we had were go start a colony, and as long as you obey generally our Constitution and you follow what our king says, you're good. Everything else is up to you. And so they had to figure it out. And what are we going to do? We've just been given all this freedom. How do we deal with it? And something that they relied upon was Blackstone's commentaries on law. Now, this was written in the 17th century. He wrote 3 volumes, and he wrote it about common law. What do you do? What are the natural rights of man? In fact, the phrase that appears in the majority of our state constitutions, original 13, as well as the Declaration of Independence, the laws of nature and of nature's God, that phrase came out of Blackstone's commentaries on law. So the first part is common law, natural law, and then the next part is the laws of nature and nature's God. All right, these are the rights, these are inalienable rights that are depicted in the Constitution. The rights of life, liberty, and happiness. Life, liberty, and property. According to John Locke, it was life, liberty, and the estate. All right, so life, liberty, and property, these common laws, this is where we were coming from in the original colony. So how did that play out? Mayflower Compact was the first document that created a form of government, and it was a representative form of government. All right, the second one, and the first Constitution of the United States, we weren't the United States then, we were simply the North American colonies, was the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, and this also created a representative government, to where the government was controlled by the people and the people were sovereign. All right, the first time we had a legislature was in 1619, and that was the House of Burgesses in Virginia. Now, the last thing, many of the colonies, they had a higher house, and that was usually controlled by the English, and that was the royalty, and then they had their governor, which was appointed by the King of France. Now they had that lower house, and that was the house of the representative government of the people of those states, and the lower house held the purse strings. They decided where the money went. All right, if you decide where the money goes, you swing a lot more power than if you don't, right? So in all 13 colonies, the lower houses controlled the purse strings. All right, sovereignty of the people here. Sovereignty of the people. We are self-governing, and we govern ourselves, and we have a representative form of government. All right, these are a few of the complaints in the Declaration. There's a list, I think the total list is 27. I could be wrong on that one. It's in the 20s. So the first one says, he has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature and right inestimable to the formidable and formidable only to tyrants. What are they talking about? So the biggest thing that I've heard of in my history books is that we started the war for independence because of taxation without representation, right? What's the principle behind taxation without representation? What are they talking about? We didn't have a say in England, in Parliament, 1,300 miles away. We didn't have a say in the taxes that were passed on us, and that was our only complaint. We passed letters starting in 1665. We sent letters to the king and we said, please, all you have to do is let us have a say in what taxes you pass on us, and we'll be okay. That's all we want. That's the only thing we want. Just give us that right, because that's our natural constitutional right under the Constitution of England, the Magna Carta and the Declaration of Rights of 1698. Those are our rights. We have this right. Just give us this right, and that's all we want. That's what they said, and they're depicting that here in the Declaration of Independence. The second one, he has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the disputatory